Okay. Well, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're watching this. I'm Mr. Phil at North End Baptist Church, and I've got my hat on. And I decided to turn it backwards. Usually I wear it like this whenever I'm in here doing my videos, but I'm inside. I'm not outside. And the reason I wear it this way is so that the sun won't get my face in my head. Well, we just have lights. So I'm putting it back here. Miss Mary didn't like it like that. So I'll turn it this way. All right, here we go. Well, we're not going to the timeline today because there are so many stories in the Bible that they couldn't put all of the stories on the timeline. We'll get back to the timeline, I think, next week, but we'll be talking about all of that today. Now, here is our story point. Can you get that, Ms. Mary? Jesus healed a man who could not walk. Jesus healed a man who could not walk. Now, we've talked about healing in Sunday school when we were having our classes. That means that something was wrong with him. He was sick. He couldn't walk. He could be blind. But Jesus healed him and took that over. So that was a good thing. Now let me show you this picture. This is our picture for today. This is Jesus with a man who's sitting on this mat, and he's lame. Lame means you can't walk. His legs were bad. I don't know if they were broken, or maybe he just could not walk for some reason. And then if you look in the back of here, if you can see that green, that is called the Pool of Bethesda. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Now, it's not really a swimming pool, but it's a pool that people went to, and I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute. Now, here we go. Well, here's our Bible verse. Yes, it's long, and it's got a few more easy words in it than the one that we used last time, but let's look at it. It's hard to see because the letters and words are so small. But this comes out of the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, chapter 53, verses 4 and 5. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God. Now, him and he is Jesus, okay? Stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed by our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. The wounds of Jesus. And remember, this is in the Old Testament, so this was talking about the future, down whenever Jesus was born and then grew up. But that's what this is talking about. The wounds were when he had the sword into his side and when he died on the cross. All right, now here's our main point. Hope you've seen this already. Why did God create people? Why did God create people? Here's our main point. I'll get it in just a second. There it is. God created people to worship him, love him, and show his glory. That means that's what our job is. We were created to worship God, to love him, and to show his glory through the things that we do, to show the glory and to honor him and watch over God as he watches over us. All right. Well, I'm right back in the middle of the room, and I'm ready for an activity that I need to tell you about today. I know you know what this is. This is a tennis ball. We're going to use this. Now, this is my hand. This is my left hand. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 fingers on this hand. Now, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to throw the ball up a little bit. And I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to count it in my head. But I need you to count at home. And be sure you keep your mind on how many times I throw the ball. Now, at one point, you're also going to see me hold up this hand. And I'm going to hold up several fingers. And then I'll change the fingers. And then I'll change them again. I don't know if you can keep up with the bouncing ball or the fingers, but give it a try. Okay? All right. Remember to count. Here we go. Now, if I drop the ball, please don't laugh at me. Or you can laugh at me when we get back to Sunday school, but not today. All right. Let's see. Whoops. Oh, Miss Mary, can you get the ball for me? Oh, gee, here we go. All right, I'll try to keep it closer to me. How about that? I don't even know how many times I've thrown it up. I thought I did. All right, I think we're gonna stop. Now, think in your brain, how many times did Mr. Phil throw up the ball? Tell your mom, or you write it down and ask her to text it to me, or when you write it down, whenever we get back to Sunday school, then just bring me your sheet of paper. You know, every time you have sent something to me, like a picture or something that we did an activity with, I kept them all. I've got every one of them. So when we get back, we'll be putting your stickers up. Now, let's talk about the ball and catching the ball and why were we doing something so silly today? Well, in the story I'm fixing to tell you, we're going to learn about a time that religious leaders focused so hard on small details of their religious laws that they missed important things that Jesus was doing. They were thinking about other unimportant things, and they weren't even paying attention to Jesus. Now, I've got 3 questions that I want you to really listen to, and then during the story, I want you to try to remember these 3 questions and remember the answers. Okay? Here's question number 1. Where was Jesus when he saw the man who could not walk? Where was Jesus when he saw the man who could not walk? Okay, number 2. Why were the religious leaders upset at the man who had been healed? Why were the religious leaders upset at the man who had been healed? And number 3, who is Jesus' father? Who is Jesus' father? All right, now let's get started for our story today. It is a good one. Got a lot of good information in it. All right, the story title is Jesus Healed a Man Who Was Lame. Lame means he couldn't walk. I don't know if he was crippled because he had an accident or he was crippled from the time he was born. We just know that he was lame. And this comes out of the book of John, chapter 5. John, chapter 5. Jesus went to Jerusalem and stood by the pool of Bethesda. Many people were at the pool who were blind, lame, or they were paralyzed. Jesus noticed a man who could not walk. He had been lying there for a long time. Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" The man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred. Someone else always gets in before me." The man thought if he could get into the water, he would be healed. Now, let me explain that to you. Because in the Bible, it tells the story about the man going to the pool of Bethesda. Now, I'll get it right in just a second. People who were sick and they were disabled went to the pool in hopes of being made whole. They believed, the people that went to the pool, believed that an angel was going to come and stir the water. The angel was going to stir the water, and the first person to get in would be healed. Nobody else, but just that first person. And that's why the man told Jesus he thought that he could get into the water and he would be healed. But the reason he couldn't get to the water was he was lame, and other people would get to the water first. What a story. Jesus told him, "You get up, pick up your mat, and you need to walk." Right away, the man was miraculously healed. He picked up his mat and started to walk. This happened on the Sabbath. That was a very special day of the week that nobody did anything except worship God. And that happened on the Sabbath, so the Jews told the man, this happened on the Sabbath, so the Jews told the man who was healed, "It is against the law to pick up your mat on the Sabbath." See, they weren't supposed to do anything. And the man replied, "The man who healed me told me to pick up my mat and walk." Now, the man who was lame didn't know what Jesus' name was, so he couldn't tell anybody who that was that healed him. But then they asked the question, who was the man? Those Jews asked. But the man who was healed did not know who had healed him. By the time Jesus had slipped away into the crowd, so he was gone. He got off into all these people and he kept moving. Later, Jesus found the healed man in the temple, the church. Jesus said to him, "See, you are healed. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you." So the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was healing people on the Sabbath. Jesus told the Jews, "My Father is still working, and I am working too." So Jesus was working on that day, but he was working along with God. Now the Jews wanted even more to kill Jesus because he wasn't just breaking their rules about the Sabbath. He was saying that God is my Father, making himself equal to God. Jesus is God's Son, and he always did what God said was right. Now here's the Christ connection, how this story pulls together. The man at the pool was unable to help himself. Jesus healed him, and he obeyed Jesus' commands. In a similar way, we are unable to free ourselves from sin. Jesus calls us to trust on him. When we trust in Jesus, he frees us from the power of sin and death so we can follow him and we can obey him. All right, now, I want you to start thinking about those 3 questions I asked you and see if you can remember the answers. And also, do you remember how many times I threw the ball up? Thank you.
Jesus went to Jerusalem and stood by the pool of Bethesda. Many people were at the pool who were blind, lame, or paralyzed. Jesus noticed a man who could not walk. He had been lying there for a long time. Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" The man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. Someone else always gets in before me." The man thought if he could get into the water, he would be healed. Jesus told him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." Right away, the man was miraculously healed.
Wow.
He picked up his mat and started to walk. This happened on the Sabbath, so the Jews told the man who was healed, "It is against the law to pick up your mat on the Sabbath." The man replied, "The man who healed me told me to pick up my mat and walk." "Who was this man?" the Jews asked. But the man who was healed did not know who had healed him. By this time, Jesus had slipped away into the crowd. Later, Jesus found the healed man in the temple. Jesus said to him, "See, you are healed. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you." Then the man went to the Jews and told them that Jesus had healed him. So the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was healing people on the Sabbath. Jesus told the Jews, "My Father is still working, and I am working too." Now the Jews wanted even more to kill Jesus because he wasn't just breaking their rules about the Sabbath. He was saying that God is his Father, making himself equal to God. Jesus is God's Son, and he always did what God said was right. The man at the pool was unable to help himself. Jesus healed him, and he obeyed Jesus' commands. In a similar way, we are unable to free ourselves from sin. Jesus calls us to trust in him. When we trust in Jesus, he frees us from the power of sin and death so we can follow him and obey him.
Hey there, I'm Pastor Brian, and it's time for Questions from Kids. Lucy from Wichita, Kansas asks,
Why does God allow people to have disabilities?
Lucy, that is a fantastic question. You know, it's one that is really important to me because I have a daughter with a disability. She has a limb difference. And so this is a question that my family has wrestled with for some time, and so I'm glad you asked it. Well, here's the big idea, that people are born with disabilities in part because we live in a broken world. Sin has infected every part of this world, and that includes that at times people are born with disabilities, like my daughter who only has one leg and not two. And so that's the real reason in a nutshell. But let me unpack that for a minute more because I think this is really important. And this is something that we have really worked hard to communicate to my daughter and others. And it's this, that there are no accidents for God. That my daughter was knit together in the womb the way that God wanted her to be, and other people with disabilities are knit together the way God wanted them to be. Now, it's hard for us to understand this, but again, we remember everything God does is for his glory and our good. And so God has a purpose in disabilities. He's got a purpose in doing this. You know, we saw that in the story today with the man who was lame, that God used him to draw other people to himself. And so we see that God can use even disabilities, things that are really difficult. And we wouldn't want somebody to be born with a disability, but God can use even those difficult things in our lives to draw other people to him, to help us understand how good he is and how loving he is. And here's the wonderful thing, that Christ came to make everything wrong right again one day. And here's our hope. My hope is that one day my daughter will run in heaven with two legs when God has made everything right again. And so everybody who has a disability has that to look forward to, that God will make right all wrongs through Jesus Christ. So here's a question back for you. How can you show love to people of all abilities?
Well, I hope you enjoyed the story, the video, and the questions from Pastor Brian, and I hope you have a great week. We're going to be together soon, very soon. Maybe it'll be another month or so. But keep listening, because we'll be sending that information to you and your family. So have a wonderful, wonderful week. I love you very much.